To mind was the comforting words of Psalm 23. So I just began to speak them over her from my memory. I memorized them in the old King James English, and that's how I know the Psalms. I'd like to say it right now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 23 is probably the most familiar of all the Psalms. Certainly comforting and appropriate at any time of one's life, but perhaps most especially toward the end. What made Psalm 23 incredibly personal to Ginny that day, the last day of her life, was her audible response to one particular phrase of the psalm. It's this one that I want to highlight. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Ginny had been listening quietly and intently as the words of the psalm were spoken until that particular phrase. When she heard, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies, out of her mouth came this very interesting sound. It was kind of like, ah. It was pretty loud. I glanced over at her, and on her face, I saw what I interpreted to be kind of an expression of comprehension. I'm convinced that it was at that moment that she utterly and finally got it. God had prepared a table for her right in the midst of her enemies. And what could display more rest, more trust, more peace than to actually be able to sit down and enjoy a meal right in front of your enemies? To me, that's in your face to the max. The rest of the psalm she listened to without any further reaction. But the important point had been made, I do believe. So I spoke a blessing over her, and I turned to leave, knowing that she was now ready, totally ready to go into the presence of God. The last words I heard from my friend were spoken very clearly. I love you, she said to me. Within 24 hours, she had slipped away. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge the members of Ginny's family, most of which, or many of which, are here today. Their sister, Charlotte Brugel, her 4 daughters, Lori, Sherry, Tony, and Tammy, and many grandnieces and nephews. her brother Eddie Coopers, his wife Penny, and their daughter Tyrell, sister Pam Lanowet, and newly discovered half-brother Kenny Godell, his daughter Brittany, and her son Wyatt. There is son Paul, his wife Carrie, grandson Levi, his wife Michelle, granddaughter Michaela, and her significant other Austin, son Chad, his wife Christy, granddaughter Andrea and her husband Christopher, and their son Lake, who is here today with us, and grandson Jonathan and grandson Justin. Each one of you in her family had a special place in her heart. And as a matter of fact, you still do. I want to just pay a quick tribute to the Johnson family for the way that they made that decision that they were going to invest themselves in the care of Ginny for however long it took, whatever sacrifice needed to be made. And those of us that were watching from the outside deeply appreciate that. So I believe now we're going to move into a time of sharing. And here comes Nate. He's going to have a mic and just be ready to share what you'd like to say.
Oh, we're going to do some sharing first. I'm going to be calling on people, so it needs to be loud enough for us to. Or I was asked to call on you, so you would raise your hand. This man will bring the light up. I can speak up. Who's first?
My name's Carolyn Burrow Campy, and Ginny and I were best friends. I was 2 and she was 3. We lived on Princeton and Addison. And I know from my mom telling me one day I went to see Ginny when I wasn't supposed to. And at least it was the side street, not the busy Addison. But I got walloped. I don't remember that, and I didn't have any siblings except teenage brothers and a teenage sister. And so it was fun to go across the street with kids. I remember Charlotte used to babysit me. She was the oldest when my folks needed a break. And Eddie used to taunt us. When I grew up later, I called him Eddie, I can't think on Beaver to Beaver. He was the Haskell of my family. But anyway, we went camping with the boat one time. I remember that our dad built it in the garage that he built. And it was called the CE. Charlotte, Eddie, Virginia, and the wife. My mind is not as sharp as it used to be. We went out probably to Ponder Ray Lake, and it was good that Eddie had said, don't let the bears come in the tent. So we ended up sleeping in the truck. The 2 of us. I think it was my first camping experience. After her mom and dad divorced, her dad didn't live too far from us, maybe a couple of miles. And on Sunday afternoons, every other week approximately, when she came over to spend time with him, they would call and say, do you want to come down and be with Ginny? Well, sure. And we would see each other sometimes, and we lost track after I went to college and all, and then came back, and I got home from church one day, and I was reading the obituaries. Growing up in Spokane, you find a lot of friends in that area. And I said, well, that's Jenny's dad that died. And my husband looked at it, and he goes, the service is at 2, and it's 1 now. So I hurried and went down to Hennessy, and I was able to be with her, and I was so proud. And she goes, I prayed that she'd see that. And we came back to their home in this area, and I was talking to her about my second marriage. It turns out my oldest stepson, my two stepsons went to school with Paul, which is, you know, another touch of the family. And lots of things that I remember over the years, that she was truly my first best friend. And I always will love her. And it's amazing how our lives touch. When I lived up on 5 Mile Prairie, and my husband was up there, it was the house where he was born is up there. And his best friend was having their 25th wedding anniversary, and they asked me to cut the cake. And I recognized this one guy, and I said, "Who is he?" I knew him, but you know, we'd both grown up. It was Eddie Coopers. He was good best friends with my husband's best friend on 5 Mile. It's funny how our lives are entwined. That's why you have to be careful when you're out in public. I had a good friend that told me that, you know, that everybody sees everything. So I just pray for the family and encourage you all to find the peace.
Thank you, sister. You have a lot of history. I will encourage others to narrow it down a little bit. Give your favorite story, and it's a little bit briefer, so more people can speak.
Hi, I'm Pearl, and Jimmy and I have been friends since '79. Can you hear me?
Let's check it out.
I never did like Mike.
Anyway, she brought me into home interiors in 1982. And Jenny and I
I've been on many trips together. We've discussed all the family, from the firstborn Paul down to the last baby. But we never got to see each other all the time because of distance. But we just really enjoyed each other. I'll tell you one funny thing that Judy did. One time, and I don't know if the boys know it or not, but she burned up some money. We had a slush fund in home interiors to help other people, and every week we put money in our slush fund. Well, Judy went on one of those camping trips, and she thought, well, the best place to put that money is in the oven. Well, she forgot when she went home, and she burnt the money. So that's all she did. But she and I have just been friends on the phone, basically. So.
We get to have that.
The button on the mic is very sensitive, so if you push it, it turns off. So just be careful of that.
Who's next? Josh Hand? Okay.